And we are excited to welcome in one of our friends from PFF, Sam Monson. You can follow him on Twitter at PFF_Sam. And Sam, the big news going on in PFF right now, the unveiling of the PFF Top 50. And of course, there are a few members of the Silver and Black on said list. And before we go into the details of those guys, I'm always really interested kind of on the back end process to get to these lists, right? Everyone's got a list. So you guys at PFF, how do you kind of go through, and I guess what's kind of the back end process to get to the 50?
Yeah, well, PFF, at its core is a player evaluation website. Like that's what we were set up to do, is be able to quantify some of these debates that we've always had and will always continue to have. How good is this guy relative to the next guy? So that's what the data is there for. So when we start doing these lists, the blank sheet of paper begins with the PFF grading, PFF WAR, our wins above replacement number. And then it's a case of, a period of time adjusting for, how much do you weigh just last season versus 2 years ago? And then how do you address guys that have, missed some time, guys that were injured last year or those kinds of things. But the starting point is that data. And then when we have our meetings about the rankings and the lists, it's subjectively, effectively moving guys up and down the list because of those mitigating factors or those little bits of context that you need to add to it.
So we got two members of the Silver and Black on the list. No shockers for either of these two gentlemen. We got Maxx Crosby checking in at number 19, and then Davante Adams cracks the top 10 at number 8. Let's start here with Max. And I'm curious, when we look at kind of the national conversation surrounding the Condor, surrounding Mad Max, how much did it change last year? Because you look at what he did in 2021, and I feel like a lot of people thought of like, okay, that's nice. But then last year, it really kind of ratcheted up a level. Max going against some of the best tackles in the NFL. So what did last year do for the story of Maxx Crosby?
Yeah, and I think that part that you mentioned was huge for it. The fact that he did it against better competition, because the first time he did it, led the league in total pressures, had over 100. But when you looked at the level of player that he was going up against, he faced a really, really weak slate of tackles that year. And, that's not his fault. You can only beat what's in front of you. And he did a really good job against those guys. But you were always left with this feeling of, let's see if he can do it against some better competition. Let's see if he can do it against guys that are not going to be dumped from the starting job, next year. And that's exactly what he did last season. He backed it up. He repeated the trick against better opposition and did it, 2 years in a row, independent of who the guys were that he was going up against. And that's always going to help cement that status and prove to people that you have actually, ascended to a new plane and reached this different level of performance. So generally speaking, I think perception tends to lag like a year behind, actual on the field production. So it was always going to take a little bit of time to catch up the level that he'd been playing at. But the fact that he was able to do it for 2 years in a row and repeated against better competition, I think absolutely cemented his reputation as one of the best edge rushers in the game now.
You look at defensive ends and fans, I'm guilty of this too, right? You want to see the sack numbers, right? You want to see double-digit sacks, which Max obviously had last year. But, when you look at a guy very much like Max, he makes so much of his impact, so much of kind of what he does best in just pressures, right? And so I'm curious, how does PFF look at, yes, it's the importance of getting the quarterback down on the ground, of having those big momentum-shifting plays, but a guy like Maxx Crosby, even when he isn't getting home per se, he's still affecting the quarterback. He's still affecting the offense as a whole in just being, constantly in the backfield and pressuring the quarterback.
Yeah, to an extent, it's the difference between process and results. A sack is the best result for a pass rushing play. It's what everybody's trying to achieve. But the process from an edge rusher standpoint or a pass rusher standpoint is simply beating your guy and then being in a position to pressure or sack the quarterback. What happens after that is, to a large extent, noise, random, luck, dependent on the quarterback, dependent on the coverage, whether he can get the ball out, all these kinds of things. So we'll give a little bit of extra credit to edge rushers for finishing the play and for getting that sack, but you can still get incredibly high grade if you apply a really quick pressure. If you do the bulk of your job, which is to beat your blocker and be in a position to create a positive play, to create pressure, you can get a really high PFF grade, even if you never sack the quarterback. If you rack up 100 pressures over the course of the season, they're all decisive, clean, quick wins. And for whatever reason, you never get home. You're still going to get a really high grade because pressure in and of itself is valuable, and it's a really important play for a defense. I haven't run the numbers recently, but a few years ago when we ran this, if you pressured a quarterback in the NFL, on average, his passer rating dropped over 30 points, right? So forget getting him on the ground, forget anything else. If you just hurried him, you were going to drop their passer rating on average 30 points. It's not, universal for every single quarterback, but that's the kind of impact you're having. So even if you don't get sacks, that pressure is valuable and a huge part of, an edge rusher's performance because it's a much larger sample size of plays.
That's wild. I didn't heard that stat before. When guys are under pressure, that it drops about 30 points on average. That's pretty nuts, and I think just shows the importance of what Maxx does, even to your point when he's not getting the quarterback on the ground. But so much of last year, Sam, we looked at what Maxx was able to do, and we looked through it the lens of obviously a silver and black one. But it was so impressive what he did. Also considering that for a large portion of the year, candidly, he wasn't getting a ton of help on the defensive line. Chandler Jones certainly came on kind of that final month of the year before he got hurt. But we look at the Raiders in 2023 now, Tyree Wilson in the mix, a top 10 pick spent on a really dynamic edge player. So what will a productive Tyree Wilson and hopefully a very productive Chandler Jones once again do for Maxx in 2023?
Yeah, it could be huge. And, this is not a conversation specific to Maxx Crosby. There are a few edge rushers in the NFL that have a harder time of it because of their supporting cast than some of these other guys. You look at some of the elite edge rushers in the NFL, they've got a ton of help. They've got guys keeping attention away from them. It's impossible to zero in on them. But then players like Maxx Crosby and Myles Garrett as well, it's been much more easy to dedicate 100% of your attention to taking that guy away. So anytime that's the dynamic of play, if you develop a better player opposite him or alongside him, it can only help. Whether or not he's the direct beneficiary, given how good Crosby is, he could end up simply being the foil for those guys, and being the reason that Tyree Wilson is having a really good season or is incredibly productive right out of the gate. But eventually that dynamic starts to shift. Once people realize that the guy on the other side is a threat to be taken seriously, then the attention starts to shift away and it benefits the defense as a whole.
Yeah, I know a lot of people here in Las Vegas are excited to see what Patrick Graham does with the three of those guys. And is there a world where we see all three of them on the field at the same time? Obviously, as we get closer to camp, we'll have a better idea of that. But Sam, shifting to the offensive side of the football, and depending on who you ask, right, the best wide receiver or in the NFL or number 2, depending on how you shake it out, Davante Adams comes in at number 8 on the PFF top 50. We talked about what 2022 did for Maxx Crosby, but for Davante, an ultra productive year again with a new quarterback. So what did it mean for Davante to say, hey, to put up these incredible numbers, these franchise record numbers with a new quarterback who wasn't Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, I think it was important. First and foremost, he was able to have another good season at his age, which is important because when you reach his age, everybody's looking for that first sign of decline, right? The first step downwards, the first little bit of production that comes off. Now, you could have explained it if it had happened for him last season because you're leaving Aaron Rodgers, you're going to a new quarterback, but it didn't happen at all. He stayed as productive, as dominant as ever, was still one of the best receivers in the NFL in terms of yards per route run, is still as efficient as ever, and with a new quarterback, a guy that isn't right now likely to be a Hall of Famer in the same way that Aaron Rodgers was. So in theory, a worse quarterback. So I think it was important for him. Number one, to sort of show that he's maintained that level and he's still able to play at that level, but also to kind of ward off a guy like Justin Jefferson, who is coming, to take that crown. Justin Jefferson, I think most people right now would say he's the number 1 wide receiver in the NFL. At PFF, we're saying he may have joined Davante Adams on that plane, but, there's no sign that Davante Adams has lost that crown. He's still playing at that level. So the king stays the king.
I love asking people that are much smarter than me and watch more football than me, especially on a national level, Sam, like, what makes Davante so good, right? Because you look at him, he's not the fastest guy in the world. He's not the strongest guy in the world. Yes, he has some of these incredible, circus-type catches, but what is it about him that, year in and year out now for the past God knows how many years, he is the number 1 dude in the NFL?
Yeah, he made being a technician into his calling card pretty early in his career. He became one of the best route runners in the NFL. He developed one of the most sophisticated and broad range of releases off the line of scrimmage, so you couldn't stick with him. And then as his career developed, he, I think, became a better contested catch type of guy and a guy that could make, those spectacular acrobatic catches. And then that's when he became, the best wide receiver in the NFL. But it's all built on that bedrock of there's nobody out there that's a better route runner, a better technician off the line, which means there's nobody out there that's going to be open as often as he is. And that gets you the targets and gets you the opportunities and helps, let you show off all the other stuff that he built into his game as well.
Yeah, I mean, he just does have that kind of innate in his DNA ability to get open, and especially when the quarterback needs him to be open the most. But Sam, before we let you go, I have this crusade here in the building, and my friends give me a hard time for it. But I have this mission, if you will. Our Daniel Carlson, our kicker, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best kickers in the NFL, in the AFC certainly. What does he need to do this year, do you think, to kind of be included in that Justin Tucker type conversation? Because I've spent too much time, I will admit, I've spent too much time going through the numbers and seeing the percentages and this and that, him compared to Tucker. On a national level, what do you think this guy has to do to be included in that conversation? And not taking anything away from Justin Tucker, who's going to the Hall of Fame, but what does our guy have to do to get a little bit of love?
Honestly, just keep doing it. I mean, that's the reality of this. And the reason that Justin Tucker has been so incredible and does have a Hall of Fame case is because the longer you create the sample size, the longer a period of time you're looking at, the more every other kicker in the NFL falls off. They reach that point where they miss a couple of kicks, they lose confidence, they waver, they just stop being the guy that they were, and maybe they bounce back down the line. And Carlson's done this already, right? Like with his initial wobble with the Vikings, why he's with the Raiders now, he's already been through one of those crises of confidence. Justin Tucker, just year on year on year, is just automatic. And when you look at these sort of charts of, guys that have been at that level of accuracy and consistency and kind of kicks above expectation and all those kinds of things, it's Tucker and then nobody else, So for Carlson to get to that level, he just needs to keep being the same guy he's been and just keep stacking years after years. And eventually it'll be undeniable, that he's at that Justin Tucker level. But the reason Justin Tucker has been able to distance himself from anybody else is that he's never had those, issues where you have to strip it down, rebuild, go in a different direction, go with somebody else. He's just kept on going. He's been automatic the whole way.
And the one thing we talk about Daniel, too, I think that just perception-wise, he needs to have some of those moments in the postseason, too, like Justin Tucker has had, just in terms of kind of the conversation and how we discuss him compared to someone like Justin Tucker. But, Sam, before I let you go, I just want to ask you this. The Raiders, obviously, a season, you're going into a season, I should say, a new season, right? A season of, I don't want to say transition, but a season of a lot of new things. A new quarterback under center, a lot of new pieces, a lot of new faces, and old faces certainly not here. But what do the Raiders need to do to be successful in the AFC West in 2023?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. It's a brutal division, one of the hardest in the NFL. Obviously, the Chiefs are going to start any given season as the prohibitive favorites for the Super Bowl. Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, their legacy, their track record at this point. But now you've got the Chargers with Justin Herbert and a new offensive coordinator, potentially better. You've got Denver trying to fix the Russell Wilson experiment with Sean Payton. So this division may never have been tougher. And it's difficult to find a way that you're going to hang with those guys. The biggest thing is I think the Raiders need to show a direction. The moving on from Derek Carr, I think, is a perfectly explainable outlook. You look across the way at Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert and these other guys, and you say, Derek Carr is good, but we need great. If we're going to contend with these guys, we need to be able to match that level. And even if you get out of that division, now you're going to run into Joe Burrow and Josh Allen in the playoffs. Like, we need a guy that can hang with those quarterbacks. So let's go and find one. So they didn't seem to get that done this offseason. Jimmy Garoppolo, for as impressive as he's been, is not at that kind of level. So I think what we need to see from the Raiders this year is, they can hang with teams. You can, in an individual game, they can definitely go toe-to-toe with any of these sides. But let's identify where the direction this team is headed and build upon that going forward.
Yeah, very well said. And I think that's the sentiment of the fan base too, headed into this season. Is like, to your point, a lot of really interesting pieces. Certainly no shortage of talent on this roster. But hey, let's see it for 17 weeks, and at the end of the season, see where the cards lay. But Sam, I appreciate you hanging out with us, man. On our way out, where can the people find you? What do you guys got cooking at PFF these days?
Yeah, PFF.com. Just like you guys, we're kind of planning the upcoming season. We might be doing a couple of relatively local training camp stops here, a little tour around of the PFF NFL podcast, either on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, is where you can listen to all that.
Beautiful. Well, let's get you out to Allegiant. How about that? I know that Vegas is a little far west for you guys, but we'd love to have you at Camp 2 to come hang out. How about that?
Absolutely. That'll be fun.
Awesome. Appreciate you, brother. Sam, be good, and we'll talk to you soon. All right, man?
Take it easy.